Hello and welcome to another book vlog. This is a mixed bag, so brace yourselves. So I'll start with Unbound, which I DNF'd at 50%. So I believe that this is meant to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but gender swapped. But oh my god, was it boring. It was very heavily steeped in Irish mythology, so there was a whole lot of Irish mythology in there, and it felt very Monster of the Week-ish. You had the two POVs of the FMC and the MMC, whom were former lovers but now hate each other. So you're sort of thrown in and then you go back and forth in time. I'm not a huge fan of that. I find it really affects the pacing, and I get thrown around a lot. So it does go back and forth in time in the two perspectives, which sounded very similar. There wasn't a lot of like character variance in terms of the writing style for both of the characters. They sounded very same. But I didn't like them. I didn't like either of them. And so I found the characters unlikable. I found the pacing off. I found the back and forth confusing. It didn't have like a very clear narrative flow. I couldn't understand what's the plot. Like, I understood what the plot was. You read the blurb and you're like, okay, that's the general gist. But the way it was getting there was just very odd and disjointed. And I wasn't enjoying myself. So I got through 50% and then I thought, Chanel, if you keep going, you're probably still just going to rate this book a 2 or 3 and you're going to end up in a book slump. And I don't want to spend hours of my life on something that was at best mediocre. It's not a worthy exchange, in my opinion. So I DNF'd that. And then I said, going forward, you have to be quicker with your DNFs, because it sucks for them too, to give a book a low rating, even though you didn't like it, if you can just DNF it and say you DNF'd it and move on. So the next book I picked up was, I'm going to grab it. So the next book I picked up was Inheritance by Nora Roberts. So I didn't know anything about this. This was just a cover grab from the library because it's a new release. And oh my God. So this is over 400 pages. I have rated it 3 stars, meaning it's fine. A lot of people might enjoy this. For me, it was very average. But it's basically a story of things that happened historically. So a woman, you start off the first chapter with a bride on her way to marry her husband, and she gets stabbed 7 times or more in the stomach by a vengeful, vexing woman who obviously wanted the husband. And the husband is so devastated, he also kills himself after his wife is murdered. And this family ends up having these reoccurring deaths of brides. I think 7 brides have been lost, is it? And then you go to modern day, where a woman finds out she's inherited this house and she goes there and it is haunted. The issue with this was the writing for me. Everything about this felt very cheesy and caricaturish and not realistic, really inorganic. How can I encapsulate it better? It just sounded written. Like everything was just written. I know, it's like, it is fictional, but some fictional books, the characters feel real and they feel authentic. This did not. Everything just felt like it was scripted. And even though it was dialogue heavy, the pacing was still so incredibly slow. Like 400 pages, they want to make it into a trilogy, but it didn't. I feel like it could have all been done in one book. It really could have. And it didn't do anything for me. There's a romance in here and I wouldn't really rate it. It just didn't, nothing about this had depth to it. Even the murders just felt very like laughable. I don't want to say laughable, but I couldn't take anything seriously. And the villainous villain, killing all these women. I'm just like, okay, love, go off. I don't know. It felt like a Scooby-Doo episode, pretty much. Who is it? Let's pull off the mask. That's what it felt like to me. I don't know. It's an adult book, obviously, but it just felt childish. And I am not going to be continuing on with the series. It wasn't for me. And it's definitely supernatural, so it's not. So, there are obviously magical reasons for things and ghosts and all that sort of jazz, and I just don't care. It does finish on a cliffhanger. So I know some people don't like that. If you don't like that, then don't read this, but yeah, I'm not continuing. Then I picked up The Idiot, and I DNF'd this at 34 pages. So got off that quickly. This is pretty much the observations and conversations of a millennial at Harvard. I believe it was Harvard. I didn't write it down in my notes. But she's just a meh, so-so character, so I didn't really care for her observations and conversations. It didn't feel like it was doing anything or going anywhere, and nothing was resonating or moving me per se. And I decided to read some other reviews, and I like to read through all. I'll read like 5-star, 4-star. I like to have a variance in all of the ratings so I can see everyone's sort of perspective and get an idea of like the book's strengths and its weaknesses. And for me, it just felt like it would probably end up being a 3-star at best, to be honest with you. So I decided to DNF it. Then I picked up An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. So I thoroughly enjoyed Dowry in Blood, I believe it's called, which was told from one of the brides of Dracula, and it was sort of focused on the toxic relationships that were in that. So this one is similar. It's pretty similar. So this one is a loose retelling of Carmilla, which is like the OG sapphic vampire book. This one features predominantly predatory women. So there's a few women that are quite predatory, and that's not my kind of like sapphic romance. It's not what I like. I don't want women objectifying women in my romance, and I just felt like the power dynamics were too much, and there were taboo elements with like maybe one of the women being the professor and one of the women being her student. It just gave me the ick in that respect. So I couldn't give this a stellar rating because I didn't particularly love the relationship dynamics that were in it. However, the writing is phenomenal, and that's why I've given it a 3.75. So even though the story itself wasn't very riveting, it wasn't like a new spin on a vampire novel. Like, it was loosely based on Carmilla, and it was much of the same in terms of vampiric stories as far as they go. And there was nothing like extraordinary about the plot and how it unraveled. It was quite predictable. So for me, the star of this book is the writing. I really thoroughly enjoy S.T. Gibson's writing. I think it's beautiful. Some people who like academia will like that aspect of it. I'm not into academia. I find it very weird. I don't know if anybody else feels this way. When in a book, an author has a character write something, in this case a poem, and then has another character critique that poem and then praise its excellence. And I feel like it's like you're sucking your own dick in that respect, aren't you? Because you wrote that person writing that, and then that character praising that. So I just find that very weird and I don't know, a little cringy. It takes me out. I'm like, the author wrote all of this. She's basically like grading her own work. I think Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe will probably like this because the author does use your catchphrase in it. I was like, oh, I've heard that phrase before. So that's for you, Olivia. But yeah, besides that, it's also mentions fashion a lot. So there are a lot of descriptions of the outfits of the ladies. So if you like that too, you might like this. But yeah, 3.75. It was a decent read. I just particularly didn't care for the characters, the relationships, and the plot. It's more about the vibes and the writing for me for this one. And then I picked up Still the Stars, and I DNF'd this at 41 pages. And this was one of my most anticipated reads. It was the sci-fi that I chose. At that time, I will say in my defense, there were only like 2 sci-fi options that were showing up on upcoming releases. There are more now, but this was not it. I really am struggling today to verbalize the way that things have been written. In this case, it just once again felt very surface level. It felt a bit pedestrian, the writing. The pacing was quite fast, and you're sort of dropped in this world almost being expected to know the backstory. So this is a second chance romance. However, and this is all in the first chapter, so I'm not spoiling anything. The FMC sees the MMC that she had a previous relationship with, and she doesn't recognize him, even though he has the same name. She's like, oh, maybe a lot of this species just have the same name. But I'm like, you were in a sexual relationship with this alien. How can you not recognize them? They have no features. Like, she doesn't have facial blindness, but she didn't recognize him. And supposedly later on she does. But I just thought that was a bit odd. And it has that whole, like, momentary amnesia shtick, which I don't like. I don't like any, I'm very reticent with second chance romances anyway, but especially ones that have the amnesia. One person has amnesia and they've got to remember that they actually love this other person and the other person is still in love with them. I don't like that. Once again, it gives me the ick. It puts a lot of pressure on the person with amnesia to regain their feelings and feel the same way for this person. And I just, yeah, it's not my cup of tea. But yeah, the world building was really off with it as well, and none of the characters were standing out. There were multiple POVs, one of them being some other dude that's on the ship, and I was like, what's his purpose? I don't know. But yes, I decided to DNF it because, like I said, I was heading to Slumpville and I really did not want to wind up in that destination. Apologies for the ambient sounds, but it is stinking hot in Australia today, and I only like to turn on my air conditioning if I absolutely must, so I've got all my windows open. The next book I read was In the Dream House. So I don't know why I thought this was a fiction book. It's not a fiction book. It is a memoir about a woman's very abusive queer relationship. And did they write it in an interesting way with using this dream house as a metaphor and captioning every chapter with like the dream house as this and the dream house as that? Yes, that was very interesting. I just don't particularly love reading about real life, intimate partner abuse. It brings back that feeling for me, and I don't want to be in that space really ever again. I can deal with it in fiction books to a certain extent, as long as it's not too pervasive. But this whole book was about it. So you're in that energy the entire time, and I was like, I did not want to be back here. So it wasn't for me in that respect. I appreciate them telling their story because as I believe not enough is shared about queer intimate partner abuse and the way that can show in a relationship. So yeah, I think a lot of people really got something out of this. For me, it was just a bit too, I don't want to say triggering, but yeah, I just don't want to be in that energy. But I don't rate memoirs, but as far as memoirs go, it was well written. And like I said, they did an interesting take on it in the way that they formatted it and presented their story. So it was quite unique and original in that way. I'm going to finish this vlog on a higher note. So the last book I read was Ripe. So I love the cover. First of all, love the cover. So this has interesting formatting in that at the start of the chapter, you get a word and you get the dictionary definitions of it, and then the author sort of puts it into context in terms of this story. Like she'll put for examples. There's also some other pages that stand out, like the black hole. So the black hole is used as a symbol of the FMC's, I guess, depression, anxiety, fears. It's this looming presence which you absolutely feel. You can feel that black hole pressing down on you in this book. I absolutely loved this author's writing style. Definitely is for me. The story itself is sort of a millennial woman's experiences in Silicon Valley. So it's a lot about capitalism and corporate America and the juxtaposition of the extremely wealthy with the impoverished and the whole work culture scene. It's also toxic relationships abound in this. So she's dating a man who's in an open relationship and tells her straight up, yeah, we can be together and have fun, but I am never going to fall in love with you. But you are singular to me. You are singular. Ugh. And yeah, it's not a uplifting book. Okay, so this is a depressing book, but I liked reading it. I found it very readable. It reminds me of a year of rest and relaxation. So the main character is not what you would call likable. So I will read you an example of the writing. The amount of pain we can endure is spectacular. We are conditioned to withstand torture, to haul grey boulders of hurt on our shoulders, to confront the pressure endlessly, the heavy, rough stone wearing away at us until our skin breaks open, revealing the bloody red flesh below. So the symbolism of the pomegranate is also rife throughout the book, and I love pomegranates and the symbolism of pomegranates. And I just really enjoyed this. I'd say the ending might be an issue with a lot of people. I didn't particularly love the ending. It is on the more ambiguous side, and it sort of just abruptly ends, but you know, that kind of sometimes is life. You might get to an abrupt ending. But the feeling of feeling trapped, the feeling of feeling pressured, the feeling of spiraling, the feeling of bleakness and pain and a never-ending black hole with no light at the end of the tunnel. These are all things that are in this book. It's more about the vibes than the plot itself. Some of the characters in this, like her boss is a woman, and she's just a huge villain, but like over the top villain. But then again, maybe sometimes in workplace scenarios, you have a workplace villain that is just the worst to you, and that feels like all they want to do is make you suffer. Yes, this was surprising, and I enjoyed it. That's why it's also good not to completely take anybody else's reviews to heart. This got a lot of negative reviews, and the only reason I picked it up was because I liked the cover and it was brand new at the library, so I was just willing just to give it a go. And it smells so good. Oh my god, this is one of those like good ones that smells amazing, and I was the first person to get this copy, so I got that virgin paper smell. But it is, yeah, it was a good time. It's kind of like the weird litfic with a woman having a mental breakdown kind of subject matter that I like. But it does tackle heavy stuff in here. So big trigger warnings, especially for things to do with unwanted pregnancies. That's pretty major. But I will check out any more of this author's works. So yes, that was my final book for this week, and thank goodness it is a 4-star. So I was very happy to end that spate of books with this particular one. Until next time, stay well, Star Child.